Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This video is going to be my Geekly wrap-up for the week of April 13th through April 19th. This week I read 4 books, didn't play any board games, but I did play a whole heck of a lot of Final Fantasy VII Remake. So let's go ahead and do the books first. The first book that I read this week was A Disability History of the United States, which is by Kim E. Nielsen. I was originally intending to read this book for the Disability Readathon, which is currently happening as of the time that I'm filming this, but then I realized that it is not an Own Voices book, and since we did specifically ask for you to pick Own Voices books for your TBR, I just decided to read that a week early. And I thought that this book was pretty good as far as a basic overview and introduction to the history of disability, both the social and medical models, and also the history of disability rights activism in the United States. I think the main thing that I didn't love about this book was that I wished it would go a lot more in depth on many of the things that it started talking about. You know, when I read books about disability history, I am a huge fan of the Neurotribes style book, which is a book about autism and the different ways that it's been understood and represented in human history, and that's by an actually autistic author, and it's a really big tome, but it's exhaustive, and I love the attention to detail in it. Disability History of the United States is not quite that level of thorough, but I would definitely recommend it if you are new to the topic and you're looking to learn a lot about the history of disability in the United States. One thing I did appreciate about it a lot was that the first chapter actually is dedicated entirely to Indigenous conceptions of disability, especially because those often get erased from typical history books because we have this, sort of dominant cultural narrative in the United States that American history begins with European colonizers arriving on American shores, and this book does not subscribe to that notion of historiography. The other thing that it also brings up a lot is basically how there have always been these movements for the care and well-being of disabled people, and how those are very often progressed by a bunch of people that then acquire disabilities later in life, oftentimes due to war injuries or industrial accidents or something like that. Whenever there's that sort of cultural shift that happens, so too comes a cultural shift around the conception of what disability is. This did good analysis on the way that a lot of disability and what people consider disabling in the modern world is informed by capitalism. It's informed by valuing people in terms of their productivity and not in terms of their inherent, value as human beings. So there is a lot of that that is critically discussed and examined. But like I said, it still happens at a very surface level. So it's really good as an introduction. If you're looking for something more in depth, I definitely think you could start with the bibliography of that book and just check out any of the primary sources or secondary sources that the author used. I also finished reading Mouse Guard, Legends of the Guard, Volume 1. This is the series of Mouse Guard comics that I haven't actually read yet. I'm gradually making my way through all of them. So I didn't actually realize this, but this is actually an anthology comic that is basically David Peterson taking a bunch of different authors and artists who wanted to contribute stories to the Mouse Guard universe and doing a Canterbury Tales style volume where these different mice are all sitting in a tavern and they have this wager that whoever tells the best story will have their tab paid off in full by the bartender at the end of the night. So you sit down and every story that each individual mouse tells is represented by a different author and illustrator. And I really liked this. It was different from what I was expecting, because I was definitely expecting a normal Mouse Guard story, which is more traditional and also by one author. But I really liked it, and I think that the next 2 Legends of the Guard books will be really good if this one is any indication. Then I started reading my books for the Disability Readathon. This is kind of nuts because I ended up reading 2 books in a single day for this readathon, which I don't know how that happened. I just sort of went into deep dive hyper focus mode and knocked them out in a single night. So I first finished reading The Oracle Code by Marika Niekamp and illustrated by Manuel Pretano. This is a graphic novel that's about Barbara Gordon, otherwise known as Babs, shortly after she is in the accident that leaves her paralyzed, and this is about her going to a rehabilitation center and trying to uncover the secrets of this facility. I really loved this book a lot. I thought it was great. I knew there was a really good chance I would like it because I really like the author already. And in case you didn't know, I'm gonna keep repeating this, but this is the first time that the character of Barbara Gordon has ever been written by an author who is themselves physically disabled. So like, this is very important in the history of comics and representation and disability, etc. But I really, really liked this story. I loved the way that it examined the way that, you know, if you ever find yourself newly sick or newly disabled or something like that, you will very often find that a lot of other folks that have been like living with disabilities or living with chronic illness for longer than you have will come and rush to your aid and be your friends and help you like adjust to this new way of being. For me, that was a lot closer to my experience, not in terms of being somebody that's like physically disabled, but somebody that came to understand their own disability not from very young childhood, you know, like it wasn't really until I was an adult that I was like, hey, disability and community is something that like is very important to me, and you know, having people just be there to support you who are going through similar, if not identical, experiences. I really appreciated the way that Marika Niekamp was able to weave in kind of her creepy fairy tale storytelling, because that's one of the things I really like about her, and there's a side character that tells these really creepy, ghostly stories, and they were illustrated in this lovely, like, gothic style way that I really liked. Let's see, what else? I guess I would say there is a slight content warning for this book because it does engage some with like eugenics and ableism, especially like medical ableism, because I don't want to say too much because it'll give away spoilers for the book, but that is challenged in the book, and that is resoundingly noted by our heroine. So I really liked this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely would recommend it. And then I read, still not sure how this happened, in one day, On the Edge of Gone by Corinne Doivis. So this book was really good. However, I will say it is an apocalyptic end of the world type story. So if that is not your thing to read during a global pandemic, which is what's going on right now, maybe save this one for later, but I would definitely recommend it. So this book is about Denise, who is a young teenager living in Amsterdam. She is autistic and she is mixed race. Her dad is black and her mom is white. And the story begins with her and her mom frantically driving toward this underground shelter where they're supposed to stay because astronauts and scientists have figured out that a meteor is heading towards the Earth and it is scheduled to make impact, and it is going to devastate the planet and completely undo life as we know it. So they are on their way to this emergency shelter that they're supposed to be staying in until the impact is over, when her mom stops the car because she wants to stop and like help somebody that they know who is struggling to get to safety. Denise is very similar to myself, understandably already anxious that they are running 30 minutes late because she keeps saying, Mom, we need to go, and then, you know, they're not going, and she's like, oh, I've planned for this, my plan is not happening, I don't know what's going on, I can't predict things for the future, but it does end up being kind of fortunate for them that they stop, because the people that they help have a spot on one of the coveted generation ships, which are these ships, some of them funded by the government, some of them funded by like wealthy business people, to take humans from Earth into outer space to colonize some twin planets that they have found out in the far reaches of the galaxy because they believe that the Earth will be destroyed. So, first of all, not only do I love this book because it takes characters that are very often left out of like post-apocalyptic storytelling. It takes characters that are intellectually disabled, physically disabled, characters that are neurodivergent, and like centers their stories in an apocalypse narrative instead of just assuming that like they all die out or kill themselves because they would rather not survive or something like that, which is definitely a problematic trope in a lot of the like dystopian or apocalypse stories. And it centers the stories of disabled people surviving during the like end of the world. So not only do I love that this is a story that interrogates that, I love the level of just like good sci-fi goodness that we get from this story, right? Like we have here a story that challenges us to imagine the end of the world in a different way than abled neurotypical authors typically would have us imagine the end of the world, both through the main character and through the side characters. There are some content warnings here, but they are also like pretty important to the story, so I won't go into too much detail. But for parental drug abuse, one of the central conflicts of the book is that Denise's mother is a drug addict and she has been struggling to accept help and go through with like treatment and stuff like that for her addiction. And there is some discussion of whether she is, you know, worthy of living on this generation ship or whether she should be left behind to die on the planet because of her addiction. Denise also has a sister who is trans. That sister is Iris, and there is some misgendering of Iris, but that is challenged in the book. So there's that. Let's see. I just really loved what this book had to say about the capacity for disabled people and neurodivergent people to be able to imagine worlds differently and also imagine solutions to problems that face the human race that are valuable and treated as such by people in power. Obviously, it's not perfect. The humans are messy in this book. They are complicated. They are living together on this really packed ship under extreme circumstances, trying to figure out what it means for the human race to survive. What does it mean to have your legacy survive, your family history survive? There was a story that really hit me, that was about a woman who was descended from Holocaust survivors that really wanted to be able to see her family continue because of what they had survived and what they had suffered during like the genocide during the Holocaust in World War II. And nobody in this book really had easy decisions to make. They were all very difficult decisions to make. But ultimately, I think that this story came down on the side of hope for a world when we work together and when we see the value in human life, especially if those lives are people that society has taught us to think are less valuable or less deserving of life and happiness, etc. Again, I can totally understand if this is a little bit too close to home for people to read right now, because I know that like this is not a hypothetical. These are questions that are playing out right now in a very real way on the world stage. But if the way that you cope with those questions and these sort of like ethical thought experiments actually like becoming real life is to read about them, I would definitely recommend this book. Again, you be the best judge of your own, mental health and your well-being right now, of whether you want to read this or not. But I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I could not believe that I read this book in a day. It is almost 500 pages, and I just sort of sat down and vacuumed the words into my face because of how excited I was to see somebody similar to myself in kind of the starring role of one of my favorite genres. And just because it's worth saying, I didn't really see this talked about in any of the reviews that I read of this book, but the protagonist is mixed race. Like, she talks about what it is like to be a Black autistic girl and the issues and challenges that she faces because of medical racism and because of health disparities. And also because, she goes through these sort of like people doubting her legitimacy and stuff like that because she is mixed race and because she does kind of like have these two different cultures that her parents are from, and that she is kind of raised as a mixture of both of their cultures. So yeah, definitely keep that in mind when you read it. The author herself is white, but I will say, take my review then as a white person's interpretation of this, but I think that it bears repeating just because I haven't seen that much discussion of it in reviews of the book. I played Final Fantasy VII Remake this week. A lot. I never finished playing the first, original Final Fantasy VII, but the remake makes me want to go and replay the Final Fantasy VII original, because it needs to happen. I just want to point out that I really loved the scene of the Honeybee Inn, and I love that, this game, despite the flaws that it still has, is, trying to make some more positive statements about, queers in gaming, and I also love the fact that you can go and collect different outfits. So I might have to just go back and make some different choices so that I can see what some of the different outfits look like, depending on the characters. So, that is gonna do it for this week's Geekly wrap-up. Please leave a comment down below and let me know about something that you have been enjoying this week. It could be anything, a book, a game, a walk in the park. I have also been really enjoying seeing all of the baby bunnies that have been hopping around my area recently when I go out and walk my dogs. If you like this video and you'd like to see more of what I do, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, because that is the best way to get updates every time I post a new video. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!